You're listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.
Hello, I'm Scott.
And I'm Hamish.
And today we're going to lead off from the last podcast where we were discussing commercialisation and the three types of commercialisation for a startup, and one being licensing, one being distribution networks, and the third is selling itself. Now, Hamish is an expert in the marketing area of getting people off the ground, especially when it's a unique product, there's no benchmarks to go by. So you have to have a marketing plan that allows you to introduce your product to a market that has never heard of it before, and sort of convince them to separate themselves from their hard-earned dollars and buy your product as against something else they've already been using to satisfy that need. Or if it's a new need entirely, educate them on why they need that product and why it's going to make their life better, hopefully. So Hamish, could you just give us a little rundown on how you'd go about a startup product, fairly unique, there's no benchmarks, where do you start? It sounds difficult, and I've done it myself and I know it's difficult.
Money. No. No. Well, okay. I think this is a very broad subject, because I think what we're talking about is you have decided not to approach someone who's going to license the product from you. So they may have platforms and money to push the product. And obviously you make a licensing fee from that, but they control everything from there. So they've got their own distribution, and that means distribution physically for the product, but also distribution in terms of marketing channels.
They've got existing followers that know their brand and follow their brand. They've got so much going for them as far as that pipeline goes.
And look,
it's plug and play.
Exactly, and I think that's the power of social media, is not necessarily social media in itself, but you've got people that have, let's say 20,000 followers. And look, I've done this with a client quite successfully, where I've said, look, we're not getting much doing our own thing in terms of spending a lot of money on Facebook ads. Why don't we approach someone who has already got a huge following and ask them how much to plug the product? Just to simply say, hey, I've been using this product. What you call an influencer. And look, there's 1,001 people out there that call themselves influencers, but the beauty of it is you can choose whoever you want to have as your influencer, and obviously they take a fee for that. They expect a fee, and it's cash for comment, if you want to call it that. But it can be quite successful, because these people have, let's just say, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 people following them, and all of a sudden they come along and say, this product of yours, which is great.
Qualification process.
It is.
That we've spoken about before.
It's
pre-qualified by a credible source, someone you're used to dealing with and understand their credible and reliable source. If they become the advocate for your product, it seems like a no-brainer to buy that product, because obviously it's endorsed by someone you trust.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, as if you haven't got someone or you're not going down the licensing road, to do everything yourself can be quite daunting. However, there's some things you've got to put in perspective, which is, yes, anyone can start a Facebook page or an Instagram feed, and you start filling it up with content. That's a huge subject all on its own, of what you choose to fill it up with. But I think if we come back and simplify that process, we've got to look at where your product is. If it is unique, you've got to find a new following. It really means you're piggybacking onto an existing industry or existing product or an existing need. So the trick is to find channels and partners that you can, and that's where your work is not necessarily pitching to investors. You've got to work hard at finding people that already have a following. How do you tap into their market? How do you tap into their audience? And that's the fastest and surest way to get something to market, is to get on board with someone else. You stand on their shoulders, or at least you get a leg up somehow. Because to start a channel on your own, if it's Facebook marketing, and just to wait for likes or follows to come in, can be a very expensive and very time-consuming exercise. However, if you are clever with your what's the better word for it, is a strategic partnership. That's what it comes down to, is finding a strategic partner who already has the audience, to then go to them and say, hey, what do you require? What would you like me to do in terms of getting on their feet and getting in front of their audience?
Previous to the podcast starting, we were discussing marketing that chops and changes, and the importance to try and really stick with a plan. And keep it on track. And not trying to just use the machine gun, scattergun sort of process and try and aim for every market. Just try and focus on the ones that are working and put your energy into those. Is that what?
Yeah, no, and that's another interesting thing I've seen in my experience of working with clients that have a unique product. Is you've got to have some stickability and you've got to get the energy to keep going and keep marketing. I think a lot of people give up with a particular strategy, and one of the things I see often is where you lose momentum is where you need to get proof for a product. So a product can be, we've spoken about this quite a lot in previous episodes, where just because you have a unique product doesn't mean to say it's going to sell itself, because the perception of need isn't necessarily there to begin with. You've got to create a need, and anything, the more you can't have something that's more unique, but if a product is so different yet it solves a really important problem, you've still got to sell it, and you've still got to get out there and get proof that it works, because that's the other side of it. It's not necessarily is it good, but is it going to work? So it could be, that there's two sides of the coin there. I mean, you can have a product which is amazing, it's going to change some area of your life exponentially, but where's the proof? So your job as a marketer then is to continually find proof, and what I mean by that is things like case studies, off-the-cuff comments, YouTube testimonials, you've got written testimonials, you've got endorsements, you've got people that are well known already in a marketplace, and you get their feedback and you get their comments, and you've got to be continually finding those, and just don't stop doing it, and that's how you get momentum. And that's, I think, one of the greatest pitfalls I think of having entrepreneurs with unique products is they just simply lose momentum because they try something for a month and it didn't quite get the results they thought, and they'll jump to something else, or they'll come back to me and say, hey, essentially, do you have another silver bullet? I don't have a silver bullet. What I can say is just keep going, keep going, because if you've got evidence that people are buying the product, and if you've got evidence that people are willing to pay what you've priced it at, well, then it's just a matter of just more and more, week on week, month on month, just going out there, getting proof and marketing that proof.
I've certainly seen evidence of that. There's two situations. Obviously, one that everyone would know about is having the advocate, a celebrity who goes and endorses your product. I mean, it's on every second ad you see. There's an ex-golfer or an ex-cricketer or an ex-rugby player out there endorsing product and making a killing. Obviously it turns products from being totally unsuccessful and unknown to being quite successful. I mean, the George Foreman grill, probably a classic that everyone knows about. I mean, he's pretty much, his career is washed up as a boxer. He's too old to box, and all of a sudden he's turned his hand. He was a very likable boxer, and so obviously he's turned that likability into a marketing tool and done very well with it. The other way, and I have seen firsthand, a fishing product, fairly simple fishing product, but really easy to put on Amazon and other sales platforms. So he had all the potential, nice profit margin, and he was a painter, and he produced the product, had it all out there, couldn't make sales. So 5 years he was trying to sell it, still painting by himself. He happened across a person with a platform with a lot of following, like 1.9 million followers. And the guy, I think for $1,000, he just paid the guy to put a 30-second clip with no audio, just demonstrating the idea, no sales pitch, and because of that, it was very organically shared, because it wasn't seen as a sales, it was seen as an educational thing, and he got millions and millions of likes or views of that product. And then partially down the way, in the comments, he just put a link to where you could find it. And all of a sudden he's employing 5 people, and he's quit his job, and he's now runs his business. But for 5 years he had the same product with no traction. Instantly pigtailed onto a third party and got the message in front of the right people. It's more and more. I mean, advocates are expensive. I've been through that process before. You try and get an advocate on board, and it is very expensive. But for the right product with the right profit margin, you definitely consider it, because the return on investment would be incredible. Obviously with our product we tried it, but we had a very low volume product and a very bad distribution network at the time, and so we really couldn't capitalise on it. But for the right person, the right product, it can really work well. And the same now people are more aware of the value of their sites and their following. You might be paying a lot more than the $1,000 that old mate paid years ago when it was all pretty new, but still worth considering, because it's an instant uptake.
Well, and I think what I'd like to add there is that's not easy either. Not that I want to put people off, but it's not just because we've given you this idea now that you just have to go and find someone with a following. I mean, the other thing you've got to consider is they've got to be a match. I mean, they've got to want to push your product because, like anything, when you've got joint ventures or brand alignment, if you want to call it that, is they're looking at your product, wanting it to also add to their own image. So you have to then perhaps take that into consideration at the marketing and branding component designing a brand and designing a message which will then be favourable to the people that you think you're going to approach to market. So it's not just a case of, okay, I'm identifying an end customer, I'm also designing a brand to suit someone that has a platform. They will be happy to share it on their platform.
The message must be important. And obviously if you have the wrong message, you're a clown who has 10 other presences on the internet with you running around being an idiot, then they're going to research that because they don't want to associate with that sort of a message. So the message of the company has to be pretty tight with their message.
Or in a nutshell, what you've got to consider is, yes, you want them to build your brand, but they're also looking at you. They want to build their own brand. So even though it might be relatively unknown, they'll still look at perhaps the visual side of your brand and think, do I want to be associated with that? Is that something that is aligned with my values? Because obviously in themselves putting a value on their own network, they don't want to be seen as flogging a product which perhaps isn't quite good. So yes, they will take a fee for it, but the smart players will also look at it and evaluate your product based on how they need to be perceived as well.
And you can see it also in some situations I've seen where you can use the online, if you've got a really aligned company with a really big following, you can actually treat them as a distributor. So you can actually approach them with a cut. Basically like they get paid a royalty for everyone they sell on their site, because it's no different in this situation to going to a wholesaler that sells into a retail situation, bricks and mortar. The same thing applies online, where if they've got a big following, they can sell a lot of this product. It's probably worth paying them a cut of the sales, so that you can enhance your sales and they get something out of it as well. They become your wholesaler in a way.
And again, that all comes down to looking at what is actually a marketing cost. So that's not a direct outbound marketing cost. That is an agreement that you would have with someone, which works equally as well, if not better than just standard advertising.
And obviously in that situation, you have to have your pricing correct, so that you can actually afford the wholesale rate. You're almost treating that situation like a retail sale. So you sell it at X amount, which might be 4 times your manufacturing cost on retail, and you have enough room in between to pay your commission to your sales platform.
And I think for people starting out, that's what they have to realise is that your recommended retail price that you've set, if you're getting someone else to sell it on your behalf, which is that's retail, that's the marketing. They've done it for you. You either pay for it yourself, and that comes off your bottom line, or you get someone to put it on their shelf and sell it, and that's also a marketing cost. So it's just your perception of value, which I think you've just got to evaluate and look at what's going to be the most effective. And I think if you're using someone else's shelf, someone else's following, someone else's audience, that's highly valuable. And I think also too, on the other side, is you've got to be very careful who you choose, because brand alignment again, building up your own brand, you have to be careful as to where it's seen in the early days, or even if it's an established product. The big companies do this all the time. They will not associate with brands that they think will diminish their own brand or take it off into a different direction, or there's no shared values, if you like. So it's all very carefully choreographed and managed. The bigger the product, the bigger the brand, the older the brand, the more managed that it is, for good reason.
Yeah, you talk about the value of that pipeline. You can imagine if you start yourself, you start putting reps on the road, you start going around doing your own advertising, it becomes very expensive. So you've got to weigh up that cost. Is it worth you doing, or is it worth going through someone else's pipeline who's already done all that? And I honestly think it's quite often a very, very smart plan to go through a distributor.
You've been listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.